And we will just wait as those numbers are just increasing. We've got quite a few that have registered for today's event. So we just want to make sure that we give them enough time just to log on and to get ready. Because we do have such a program, what I might do is I might just get started. That way, if we do get extra participants, they can just log on while we start with the proceedings. And I will begin by just acknowledging the traditional owners on the land in which we meet, the people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, as well as any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders on the call today. Welcome, my name is George Descala from Global Victoria, and I'll be moderating today's Victorian e-commerce networking briefing on China's skincare and cosmetics sector update. We have 4 speakers lined up today. They include Nick Henderson from the Victorian Government Office in China, Lisa Yu, a global brand specialist focused on China, Meta Nunson, a China beauty and cosmetics specialist, and we've got Mark Schwab, a legal specialist focused on China. As part of today's session, you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions. You can do this either by placing it in the chat function of the Teams portal that you'll find up the top, or alternatively, wait till the end for the Q&A session and you can raise your virtual hand. Just a reminder that this session will be recorded and will be made available on the Global Victoria website. To get started, I'd like to introduce Nick Henderson. Nick is the Deputy Commissioner for Greater China. Nick was formerly a director at AsiaLink Business, where he headed up their China practice. Nick has worked, studied and lived in China for many years. This has included working for companies like IKEA as they established their China presence. Nick began as Deputy Commissioner in 2021 and is based in Chengdu in the west of China. Nick has been instrumental in organising today's speakers and the ongoing focus by Global Victoria on the cosmetics and beauty sector. It's big thanks to Nick for having and organising today. With that, I'd now like to hand over to Nick for a few comments. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much, George, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to our 2 guest speakers who are joining us from Europe. It's my pleasure to be joining you today from the Victorian Government Trade and Investment Office in Chengdu. Before our guest speakers get into the detailed topics for today's webinar, I thought I would share with you a few observations on what factors are driving the business environment here in China, what are some of the challenges, and also what are some of the areas of opportunity. As I'm sure you're all aware, there are numerous challenges facing all of our businesses within the current circumstances. When it comes to business engagement with the People's Republic of China, the past few years have been the most challenging in recent memory, with both COVID and the chilling of our diplomatic relationship. China is also one of the few global jurisdictions to maintain a zero-tolerance COVID strategy. This means that the borders are closed and look to be closed for the foreseeable future. Whilst there are current small-scale outbreaks in Inner Mongolia, Jiangsu, Liaoning, Sichuan, Yunnan, Hubei, Beijing and Guangdong, there were a total of 90 reported cases yesterday. China has successfully contained the virus thus far with a combination of movement restrictions, monitoring with health and travel codes, targeted lockdowns, and restrictions based on targeted locations using big data. The uncertainty is how China will then transition to a new normal and open up its borders, and that is still to be seen as to how that's going to be managed. First of all, focusing on, I guess, some of the challenges, and then I'll talk about some opportunities. I wanted to mention just a couple of key trends. The first is actually not that new to everybody, and that is that market competition and market shifts or changes still present challenges for Australian, for Victorian skincare and cosmetics businesses. As you will know, China remains a highly competitive market. COVID and closed borders certainly have not changed this situation. Not only the competition from international brands, but also the growing number of indigenous cosmetic and skincare brands that have really started to come to the fore in the past few years that are targeting younger generations of Chinese consumers. These younger generation of Chinese consumers are receptive to buying Chinese and also have disposable income to buy cosmetics products. So we are seeing much more capable local competitors, plus the proliferation of international competitors in the marketplace. That also in addition to Chinese consumers being more informed than ever. Now, not only, and many of you know the sort of product information you need to be putting on your e-commerce websites and that you're pumping through your social media channels, that is only becoming more and more important and more relevant. And with that information, the consumer is armed with power to make decisions about differentiated products. So this is a double-edged sword. It obviously means challenges in order for businesses to really specifically target products to consumers, but also means that if you do have a well-positioned product with clear functional benefits, a clear pricing strategy and channel strategy, that you're able to cut through to your targeted consumer. In China, the only thing that remains constant in Chinese consumer markets is change. So, and this has always been the case, but it becomes even more rapid when you have seismic shifts in the way that an economy and a society operates, like during times of COVID. What we're seeing is that Chinese markets, in terms of consumer behaviour, is changing rapidly, and that presents both opportunities and challenges to Victorian and most importantly Victorian consumer and skincare products. Consumer tastes and trends are evolving, and new products are still entering the product, even though there are border restrictions. It goes without saying that successful companies within the market have invested in developing a deep understanding of what their consumers want, how they buy, where they buy, and what is the correct price point in multiple channels on a constant basis, which is not that easy, because when you think you've mastered that knowledge, the market changes. It's also important, in particular at this point in time, to really understand that China is not just a homogenous market, but obviously there are very diverse geographic marketplaces, each with their own particular requirements and their own particular specifications. For example, China has over 100 cities which are the same or larger size as Melbourne. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment with an example from Southwest China, but succeeding in Chinese marketplaces, gone are the days necessarily where going to Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen as the first port of call. These are relatively mature marketplaces. They're also highly competitive marketplaces. It may well pay to be looking at a two-tier strategy where you are looking at some emerging marketplaces as well to gain some market space. The second challenge is what everyone is feeling, but I'm just going to put a little bit of a Chinese context to it, and that is freight. And obviously, from an air freight point of view, up until recent times, we've had, in effect, most of the commercial flights between Australia and China cancelled due to the proliferation of Omicron outbreaks in Australia. As some of that starts to come back online, the belly freight plus commercial air freight still is far and away less than what was available previously in the marketplace. Obviously, that has an upward pressure on freight and supply chain costs. We are also seeing fluctuating sea freight prices between Melbourne and China, driven by all sorts of demand shifts that are occurring, in particular between the East Coast China and US routes that are having implications on container availability and also sea lane availability or shipping availability as well. And also at different points in time, we are seeing slowdowns and also closures at different ports. As an example, the largest port in the world, Ningbo, was shut down for nearly a week during December, having massive flow-on effects, not only for logistics coming into the country, but trickle-down effects into logistics around the world. This zero COVID strategy that China has means that there are also delays at times for clearance of containers. Obviously, chilled and frozen products are the primary area where those delays are occurring, but there have been delays that have been noted at different points in time across the board for clearances. The next one is regulatory, and that is also why we are here today. And product approvals and the issues related to animal testing as a part of the process have been a long-standing issue for skincare and cosmetic exporters to China. Whilst the Cosmetic Supervision and Administration regulation came into effect on the 1st of January 2021, this has paved the way for approvals without requiring animal testing to be conducted. There are still a number of challenges with that process and implementing that. And that's obviously what we're going to be hearing today in much more detail, specifically from Mette Knudsen and Mark Schwab as well from KWM. In terms of opportunities, looking at some of the positive elements, there are some pretty strong economic fundamentals. Whilst I'm not an economist, I thought I'd focus on a couple of figures that indicate that there is still some room for hope. Whilst we don't know what is going to happen from the macro economy within 2022, we are still operating and we are still in challenging times. China's economy is projected to still grow at 5.5% during the year, which is far less than the double-digit growth that we experienced over 10 years ago, but it's still a more normalized growth pattern after a expansion of the economy from a pretty low point in 2021 by 8.1%. The bilateral trade between export trade between Greater China and Victoria saw a slight increase over 2021 to $6.9 billion from 5.498 billion. So actually, I should rephrase that. 4.498 billion of exports were sent to mainland China from Victoria last year. So given the current situation, that is some pretty encouraging macro trends. Demand for products in terms of consumer fundamentals, there is pent-up demand for consumption as people are not able to travel. A lot of that luxury spending and a lot of that excess of consumer spending that's not being otherwise channeled into international travel is being channeled into domestic consumption. And that saw retail sales grow by 12.5% in 2021, and online sales increased in 2021 slightly higher by 14.1%. We are still seeing emergent trends of the growth of cross-border e-commerce, new retail models, and I'll just talk very, very quickly about that. Hema is a model that many of you are aware of. Hema is now expanding into the membership store model, which also has a hybrid online-offline element to it by the sort of expansion or the setup of Hema X stores, which are very similar to Sam's Club. The evolving live streaming and social commerce elements of e-commerce has become and continues to be more prevalent than ever. And the importance for businesses in having the right channel strategy between cross-border e-commerce, general trade online, general trade offline, social commerce, online to offline, etc., is obviously more critical than ever, especially as we move into the phase of having cosmetics products being approved for general trade sales. So that is something that I really just wanted to really focus on, is that whole channel development process is continuing to evolve. Another element too, especially when it comes to online sales, when it comes to cross-border e-commerce, what we're seeing is a lot more regionalised players. So, for example, we're seeing in Tier 2 cities, in Tier 3 cities, a lot more mother and baby or skincare and cosmetics cross-border e-commerce channels specific to geographic target markets. We've noticed that down here in Chengdu and in Chongqing, where we have specialised players in certain categories for cross-border e-commerce, which opens up opportunities for skincare and cosmetics companies to focus on specific geographic marketplaces, even through an online platform. And if we look specifically at Southwest China and we look at the Sichuan and Chongqing economies, they are actually within the context of China, some of the fastest growing economies in the country. And Sichuan grew at 8.3% last year, Chongqing at 8.2%. I believe Yunnan was about 7.9%. And as a region, it's a very fast growing region compared to other parts of the country. So if we then translate that across to retail spending, which is growing at over 15% a year, and also the fact that local governments like the Sichuan government are heavily promoting imports. Now, the Sichuan Department of Commerce this year have named 2022 the import year, and they're talking to us and many others about encouraging imports into this economy. There obviously are going to be unique opportunities for consumer products, food products and the like coming from Victoria into China. So I'd just like to finish off by making a few remarks about our VGTI network in Greater China. We are a team of 25 focused on promoting Victoria's trade to China, attracting investment across a number of value-added industries into Victoria, and also promoting international education exchange, which is a very big business for us between both Victoria and China. We have offices in Beijing, Shanghai, Nanjing, Chengdu, and Hong Kong, and we are working as best we can to support Victorian businesses to enable business as usual business with China. And we have a number of initiatives like our Vic House and our Study Hub initiatives in Shanghai to support facilitation, business facilitation in the market. But also, if you are a Victorian skincare and cosmetic business and you feel that there are areas that we may be able to assist you with in terms of maybe introducing potential partners or just getting insights into the market, please do, in the first instance, reach out to my colleague, Jessie White, whose contact details I believe you should have, and we would be more than happy to see how we may be able to assist you. That's all from me. Hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar. Back across to you, George. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I now have the pleasure of welcoming Lisa Hughes, founder of GenLab, a global brand incubator. Lisa was also L'Oreal's youngest country head of social for China. Lisa has worked with a global German-based cosmetic brand, Essence and Cantress, before setting up her own company. Raised in Germany, educated in England with a Chinese background, Lisa represents a new breed of global citizens working with Western worlds to better understand the new online Chinese consumer. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Lisa. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and hello to everybody. I hope you can all see my screen. I'll probably leave it in this mode because I had a previous experience that whenever I go into presenter mode, it's not very stable because we are cross country, and yeah, so I will leave it like this. I hope everyone can see clearly. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here today. I will be introducing some China beauty trends in particular. So a little bit about me. So thanks very much for the introduction. My name is Lisa and I'm German-born Chinese. I'm in Shanghai. It's my 6th year now. And I've been working in beauty straight. So I started at L'Oreal in Germany, came to Shanghai in 2016, worked for Clarins, and then joined my business partner at Genuine German, where we bought particularly German brands, because that's our background, to China, and we see massive growth. So for Essence and Catrice, for example, we managed a 216% growth within 1 year. Yeah, and that's where I decided to spread the word about such big opportunity, and this is why I'm now a consultant in that area. And I also founded GenLab. We focus more on really purposeful brands to complete the China growth story, basically. We are now currently working with Alaya Skin. They're also based in Melbourne. And yes, so today I have 3 areas I want to talk about. So basically, if we think about China beauty trends, it can be divided into, of course, the consumer, the product, and the channel. And since we're in such a special moment with the COVID-19 influence, I have also added a little gray bubble to make aware that some of the trends are really influenced or coming because of the because of the virus. Okay, right. So starting with the consumer, some major trends we see here is really the buy less but better effect, meaning that the Chinese Gen Z customer, especially the younger ones, they do not follow the trend of the Chinese term is tu hao, so buying everything, being bold, having the big logos on their shirt. So they really pay much more attention about quality and really, really better products. And better meaning, in terms of the feel of the packaging, the innovation, the design, because many Gen Z consumers also have more and more a global taste. And I think this is partially influenced by the COVID because many people start to reflect on Xiaohongshu, the very popular social media platform here in China. A lot of hot topics are surrounding, for example, what's my purpose in life? I quit my job just because I want to pursue what I really love to do. And the Marie Kondo trend about cleaning up, spring cleaning is kind of evolving more and more. So while previously everyone was hoarding, especially beauty products, we see that now people make much more conscious choices since the education and the information is much more wider spread. Right. The second one that we're seeing, especially under the younger consumers, are the growing national pride. And I'm sure many of you have heard about it, that Chinese consumers or Chinese brands are actually evolving. And I think this is also much reflected in the styles of emerging brands. So one brand is called Tusama Guanxia, which is a interior fragrance brand. So they have little diffusers, etc., and they play with the traditional Chinese flowers, and the whole look and feel is not very traditional Chinese, but you can see that it's Oriental and Asian. Yes. And so what I found super interesting personally is that some brands or Chinese consumers, they like to mix some elements of Chinese styles with their global tastes. So they have maybe seen the world, they've traveled previously, but now they are starting to kind of incorporate it in their styles, in their approaches, or in their social media. I think one implication that I see here, especially because we are bringing foreign brands to China, is that the heritage story is not so much of a unique selling point anymore. So while maybe even 5 or 10 years ago, it was enough to say, oh, this skincare brand comes from Germany, it stands for good quality and science. Today, it's not as relevant anymore as it previously was. So it is still a good aspect and still stands for quality. However, what we see a lot in the localization, stronger unique selling points and stronger branding is required rather than just say, oh, it's a XX German or UK or US or Australian skincare brand. Yes. Another thing what I found very exciting is that consumers desire shoppertainment. So these 4 pictures are from a KOL friend of mine, and she has been participating in the Lancôme New Year's pop-up event. And a lot of brands, they start to create those experiences because only targeting the consumer through media or through social is not enough anymore, simply. So consumers are getting more and more sophisticated, and the whole idea of convenience is not big anymore, because China is too convenient with for example, food delivery or Taobao or JD getting the products the next day. So nowadays it's really about creating desired entertainment and really the social interaction that aligns with consumer values and something that is postable or shareable. So the 4 elements that we see, especially in the cosmetics world, are virtual makeup try-on. So this one is a technology called Modiface, acquired by L'Oreal. I think it was in early 2015 or 16. But also funny things like the fragrance vending machine, where previously there was maybe a beauty advisor standing there and spraying it on the card. Now it's super automatically. It's like a card where you just plug into the machine and then it diffuses the newest fragrance. Or experiences in terms of a 3D digital card. So this one was a retail kind of pop-up where you could film yourself in a 3D environment and send a digital greeting card, or for example, do-it-yourself red envelope during Chinese New Year. So it's really the incorporation of what does your brand stand for, and then how do you facilitate that in different experiences. Right. Moving on to product. So what I love to see, and it really excites me, is that actually sustainability, or the whole idea of clean beauty, or that the kind of awareness is there towards a more healthy and more sustainable and more eco-friendly results. We know that natural and organic is a huge market, especially in the US and in Europe. So globally, it's projected to grow to 55 billion US dollars in 2027. And finally, I feel like slowly this kind of good trend has also arrived in China. And I feel like this is more or less due to COVID, or COVID definitely has an impact, because people start to realize how important the health aspect is, and not only in terms of physical health, but also mental health. So this is quite a trending topic on social media. And what we also see, or what I see, is that there are some Chinese clean beauty brands evolving. So for example, there's one brand called Soba Beauty, another one called Dewy Lab. And Dewy Lab has just been invested by Little Red Book, so the biggest or the most, not the biggest, but the most relevant probably platform for beauty and KOLs. So I think the awareness is there. But what I want to mention is that it's not yet a unique selling point or a reason to buy. So I feel like clean beauty or organic products, it reflects a value. It reflects, some core principles of yourself. However, it's a little bit similar to the heritage story. It's not enough yet to make it sell. So whilst previously maybe it was enough just to say, oh, it's a really amazing brand from abroad, you just put it on Tmall on shelf and it's sold automatically. This is nowadays not the case anymore, and same with clean beauty. I feel like the trend is there and awareness starts to come, but it has not reached the tipping point yet. right. So because, and maybe that's also, you know, a shift, we see that the Chinese consumers are still chasing the noble and premium lifestyle. So whilst organic, sustainable, healthy is a very yeah, health orientated and very very nice kind of lifestyle. There are a significant amount of Chinese consumers who are still chasing luxury, this lifestyle of premiumness, and yeah, they just want to be associated with that. And they do have the financial resources and the willingness to spend as well. So another thing that we see is that those consumers also get younger and younger. And they are very efficacy, especially in skincare, maybe efficacy driven. So in the recent years, brands like Helena Rubinstein, which stands for, you know, the mascara in the Western world, they have done incredibly well on skincare here in China. So really like premium skincare, or the ones like La Mer, La Prairie, from yeah. Those kind of premium, really efficacy driven, like SkinCeuticals, those kind of skincare brands did very well here in China. And this is partially also due to the spa channels. So what we could observe is that, so I know it for SkinCeutical and Helena Rubinstein, that in China, they have been driving a spa to consumer kind of approach, where you can feel and sense and experience the brand offline first, and then they used online to really drive repeat purchase with different offers, minis, etc. during Double 11 and 618. Yes, but really facing the consumer touch point offline is a significant strategy. Then I have two more trends on channel, because I think that's also quite interesting and important. And I think not surprisingly, this is what everyone talks about, social commerce, especially with the fast rise of TikTok. And I can only confirm that, because in our everyday work, we also do live streams on TikTok. We work with the platform very closely. We sell our products there, and I've only made good experiences so far. However, where one needs to pay attention is that social commerce is, of course, based on social content. And social content is usually, or most of the times, created by a third-party content creator, like a key opinion leader or a key opinion consumer. And here it's really important to keep the core of a brand and not lose the brand identity in all the distribution activities. Yeah, so that's, I think, one of the core things that we are observing. And last but not least, yeah, new retail offline concept. So that's something I'm really excited about, because it really challenges the status quo, the position of Sephora partially. So there are different concepts. I just put a few here. One is called Harmay, another one Heat. So Heat's founder is ex Xiaohongshu, ex Little Red Book, and for example, The Colorist by the KTV group, who are really, you know, expanding super fast. And what I found super interesting is that they are starting to create their own stories. So Harmay, for example, if you go in, there are two baskets. So one is, I think, green, one is red. And then if you have the red basket, you do not want to be disturbed by the beauty advisor, because what they have found in their studies is that younger consumers, they just want to browse, they want to go through their retail stores, they want to pick and select, and they do not want any advice. However, if you pick the green basket, it means that you want help, you want advice, etc. Because that was the number one reason why people didn't, for example, purchase something at Sephora or Watson's, because they were pushed to sales. And nowadays, consumers want to make their own choices. Heat is a retail store which focuses on C beauty brands. So they, I think, 80% distribute Chinese beauty brands by Chinese founders. So the new ones, the up and rising, and The Colorist, they got famous funnily because they had a wall with makeup eggs. So the eggs that you can, where you can divide your makeup. And it was super, in the Western world we would say Instagrammable, but of course it went viral on Xiaohongshu, where key opinion leaders and influencers were posing in front of the wall. So this is how the store went viral. Also a very interesting concept, how retail stores or new concept stores use the power of social media to gain traction. Okay, so we have discussed the trends from a consumer perspective, from a product perspective, and from a channel perspective. At the end, I want to say something that I'm personally observing and something that is very close to my heart is the branding aspect. So I feel like whilst in the previous years, China really has championed product manufacturing as well as supply chain, and with Perfect Diary, the channel strategy in China. However, aesthetics and craftsmanship is still a very new battlefield for Chinese brands. And I feel like the time has now come for brands to really appreciate and put attention to the branding aspect. And by that I mean really value-based activities and not just short-term traffic push, because with so many brands, when we do analysis on e-commerce, when we map it against their spendings, we just see this very fluctuating trend that whenever you put in marketing money or advertising money, you see results, but once you stop, the sales stop as well. So I think it's really a decision and strategy to balance the short-term ROI, and by that I mean live streaming, I mean traffic pushes, I mean big e-commerce marketing spending, versus the long-term kind of brand aspect of it, where you nourish your brand, you create a pull towards the consumer. So you do not push the product to it, that's my USP, buy it. It's rather creating the story around it, the values around it for the consumer to come to the brand. I think that's going to be a super big thing that Chinese brands will realize, hopefully, and I think that's also at the forefront for foreign brands to enter China, to have a strong branding and not lose it in the very agile and complicated China digital landscape. Okay, so that was it for me. Thank you very much for listening. I would love to connect on LinkedIn. And yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you. I'll pass it back to George.
Thank you, Lisa. As mentioned before, if you've got questions, you can put them in the chat function, or we can wait till the question and answer session later on. Our next speaker is Mette Knudsen. Mette is a respected authority on cosmetic and beauty product regulation for the China market. Her company, Knudsen & CRC, advises global brands how to navigate the complexities of China's ever-changing regulatory environment. Global Victoria has been working with Mette over the last 4 years to better understand this growing and critical market for Victorian exporters. It gives me great pleasure to introduce a long-time friend of Global Victoria, Mette Knudsen. Mette, over to you.
Thank you, George. Thank you. Can you hear me? George, I just need to know if you can hear me.
Sorry, Mette,
Yes.
we can hear you. Yes, yes, we can hear you, Mette.
Okay, great. So you can hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So first of all, thank you so much, George and Nick and Lisa, first of all, to Global Victoria. As George mentioned, we have been working for years, and for a reason, because obviously the Australian companies, their closest market is China, and although there has been, as Nick say, a little bit frosty environment between China and Australia, I have to say one thing, and that is within cosmetics, luckily we don't feel the harassments. Whereas maybe in many other industries, especially the food industry, but also energy and so forth, there has been maybe some barriers, some trade wars going on, but within cosmetics, we do not see that, which is amazing. And it's also a different regulatory entity. So while there may be much more competition on the market, we also see that Australia is still kind of a favorite within many industries. And we would only encourage the Australian brands to seek this opportunity as the market open up without animal tests. Next, Jessie. So I want to no, well, actually, most of you already know me, so we don't need to. You can always reach out to our homepage and find out more about what we do. Today, I just want to walk you through the early experience with the new regulatory framework and why is that important. Lisa's presentation was extremely interesting, talking about how customers will require some kind of experience with you, that it puts more requirement to you to entertain and educate your customers on the market. And we do know that Australian clients have been, I would say, spoiled a little bit with the Daigou traders and the cross-border e-commerce, and it has been easy. Now the consumers require that you're on the market, and luckily it's possible for cruelty-free brands to enter the market without animal tests. So, but the thing is, you need to undergo a product registration process. And by May last year, we had the new cosmetic regulatory framework coming into force, and it's a far more, I would say, complicated in many sense to get into the market now. Although animal test is no longer mandatory, the new cosmetic regulation are now impacting distribution, your ingredients, your manufacturers, your liability, and so forth. But the most important part here is not that a lot of the responsibility rests with the companies, but actually that the monitoring of your quality and safety on the market is now with the consumers, just like we see in the West, especially in the US. So more than 90% of the complaints about product safety and quality actually comes from the consumers today. And that's what the system is built around. That's how to understand it. Next slide, Jessie. So just to give you a little bit of our own, I would say, experiences with the new, I'll run you through the biggest thing that we have stumbled upon that may pose a barrier for you. And one of the things that you may have noticed is that even if you're not registered in China, you will see that the cross-border channels are getting more and more regulated, even though that registration is not required. And we expect that for the future, these channels will become more and more regulated. So it's no longer just possible to say, well, we avoid the registration part, we just sell cross-border. Even cross-border now require or have some regulatory requirement, and we expect them to increase. That is based from the authorities notifying us to keep an eye on these regulations for the future. In regards to cosmetic labeling, one of the huge areas and concerns for you guys is that for the future, you will actually have to disclose your manufacturer's name and address, and you have to have them on the label. So that disclosure is mandatory if you're going to register in China. There are ways, it's not like we're looking for loopholes, because that's not the thing, but obviously there are ways how you can maybe put a little bit more, how do you say that? Not disclose everything to the consumer, even though it's required. So still, the manufacturer has a lot of liability in the new laws, and I'll come back to it later on. Next slide. So I know that Nick talked about children's cosmetics. There's one thing you have to keep in mind is that children's cosmetics is now separately regulated, and it will require a logo, and it also requires animal tests. So you just need to keep in mind that for those brands that previously could enter the market as, for example, the domestic made cosmetics. It was part of our Leaping Bunny pilot with the authorities in Shanghai. And now actually all children's cosmetic have to test on animals, and it will bear a logo, specific logo, to enable the consumer to reach out for more safe and more regulated cosmetic products. And then finally, we also have requirements to your manufacturer. So the manufacturers, for example, in Australia, there will be requirements. But even though it's on the paper look a little bit complicated, I can assure you it's more or less like the GMP certificates that you may have in place already. So we don't see a lot of challenges with that part. Next slide, Jessie. So, and this is actually, I have another presentation for today, but this one is a 1 day old or 2 days old presentation. And as you can see, the implementation guides give you an overview of all the regulations that has come out and what we still wait for. And you can tick one off, and that is 2 days ago, we got the new implementation guidelines for adverse reaction monitoring of cosmetics. And it was more or less as we expected. It includes a lot of stakeholders, distributors, applicants, manufacturers, and so forth, that has to report in regards to any adverse reaction, but they also have to collect the information. So a huge system coming into effect, I think, from next year. But you know, if you have questions to this new regulation, just reach out and we will give you a detailed update on this one. Next slide, Jessie. So one of the things that many of you see as a challenge, and we do understand why it's a challenge, is because in the new law, just like in Europe, you actually have to have a responsible person. And in Europe, it's a responsible person that owns the PIF files. In China, the responsible agent is a legal entity, and it can either be you as an applicant, the owner of your registration, who sets up a WUFI in China, or you can outsource that responsibility to a third-party consultant company or a very trusted third party, obviously. And then in the new law, the manufacturer plays a far bigger role, very relevant for the manufacturers that are participating in this seminar today. And then you have to keep in mind that there has to be a quality and safety responsible person within the manufacturer with at least 5 years of experience. That's also a new requirement that some of you have some difficulties in actually adhering to. Next slide. So for the just to illustrate how the stakeholders and what the roles and responsibilities are, and in this case outside China means, for example, Australia. You are the applicant, you're located outside of China. You need to set up a legal entity in China as your responsible agent, or you need to appoint someone. And I know that this is something we discuss a lot. How do you make sure that the responsible agent that you appoint is trustworthy? You will disclose so much information to that particular agent. So safety, information security is vital in that part. And we have seen cases where the handling of confidential information was not well done, and there's some confidential information came out, or even worse, some distributor totally copied an overseas brand by having all that information at hand. Next slide. So to give you an idea of if you set up your own WUFI, what is required, and this is just very brief, I can tell you we have maybe 80 pages of what is actually required and all the systems. The responsible agent in China, that is the person that is liable for the quality and safety of the products that you're selling in China. There are a number of requirements, but I think the most important part and the biggest challenge is to make the systems that are compliant, that's the monitoring system, the reporting system, the tracking system of adverse reaction or consumer complaints. These online systems, they have to be up and running. This is, I think, one of the biggest challenges, but another challenge could also be to recruit the right team around the duties of responsible agent, because there are quite strict requirements in that regard. Keep in mind that if you change your responsible agent, you can only change within provinces. So our suggestion is register your product in Shanghai. Sorry, Nick, I know that Chengdu might be a good place to register, but we recommend Shanghai because it's just like Paris of cosmetics or New York. This is where most of the big brands have their headquarters, and you will see that on the label. And within Shanghai, you can actually transfer the duties of responsible agent quite swiftly, within days, actually. So next slide, Jessie. The overview of our biggest experience and challenges, and these are quite trivial, actually. Power of attorney, we have had so many troubles with that because there's a comma missing, or you maybe make an abbreviation instead of printing out the full name from your business license. Power of attorney gives so many delays because they're rejected if there's just one minor difference between the original documents and the power of attorney. Keep that in mind. We always screen it before we go through legalization and so forth with the authorities. Then, of course, personnel in China, also big challenge to recruit the right people and to keep the right people with the experience that is required. The labeling requirement, another thing is keep in mind that your address as responsible agent has to be printed on the label. It also means that you have to have staff on the ground that can actually handle these roles, also because that will be the supervision from the authorities. They will visit this address that are printed on your label for approval of your the way that you're handling your quality safety. And then post-market surveillance, also posing some issues for the bigger brands because we need to store all your samples for quite some time. It's the shelf life plus 6 months. So you can only imagine with time, it's a lot that is accumulated because for each batch you import, we would have to store a sample. And then we have the whole new adverse reaction and product recall system in place. Very, very interesting, but very much as we expected. So there's no big surprises in that new regulation just coming out 2 days ago. Next slide, Jessie. Next slide. Efficacy claim, huge challenge. It's a new law that came out or coming into effect this year. And basically it's like this, that all the product we registered for you last year, they now have to prove their efficacy. That means that even moisturizers, body lotion that has nourishing claim or something like that, we have to document everything. And for those of you who registered last year, we only have 1 year to do it. For other brands that has been registered for many years, they have until 2023. So now you see this as a challenge, right? But we actually see this as a huge opportunity for you guys because many brands are not able to prove the efficacy of their products. So turn it around and look at the fact that maybe only 10% will be available of product registered within the next year. It's actually a huge opportunity because it will definitely remove a lot of products from the market that are not able to document their claim, and then they're not allowed to sell in China. Next slide. So in order to do an efficacy claim right, we always suggest to speak to some experts before you even start having any claims on your products, your website, your communication, anything, because claim is also something we speak about in advertising and marketing, something that is monitoring very, very closely. And I can tell you that I think it was Esther Lauder who got a huge fine for, communicating a claim, and even though they could document it outside of China with tests and so forth, they weren't able to actually follow the same test protocol in China, or they haven't done it, and then they were not allowed to use that claim. So claims are a part of the registration process. We will discuss a lot with you, and we also have to fit your claim into a very limited number of claims that are available. If you have new claims, just keep in mind, then you have to undergo animal test. Next slide. And just a very quick overview, and I actually have warned some of you that we want to have a separate seminar with just for the claims and these challenges and the labeling part, so forth, because it is complicated to document your claim, and it is a completely new system. But generally, we actually recommend that your efficacy claims are tested and documented in China. Reason is that the protocol may not be the same, the test protocol as required in China, so the one you use in Australia may not be the same. And secondly, no matter what, you have to translate everything into Chinese, and it can be quite expensive. So we recommend that these tests are done in China, and then you can use them on other markets. So that's maybe a new way of looking into registration, that you actually initiate the test in the Chinese market. Next slide. So you need to fill out this efficacy claim declaration form, relatively easy. Right now, we only have to submit a summary, but with time, obviously, we will know more about what is actually required. We are still trying out and in dialogue with the authorities. The authorities don't even know exactly how much is required to be uploaded into the system. We hope it's not the full test, because that can be hundreds and hundreds of pages. Next slide. I'll go through that very quickly. Raw material declaration is a new requirement, and it's relevant for all the manufacturers and your suppliers. No product today can be registered without declaring your raw materials. This year we have 5 categories that is required, colorants and so forth. I have the details here, but next year it's all ingredients that need to be declared, and you can only imagine if one of your suppliers, raw material suppliers, is not willing to provide a declaration. It's actually free of charge. You don't disclose anything to the public and so forth, but there will be someone who is hesitant to do that. That can actually mean that you cannot register your product in China. So you have 2 options. Either the raw material supplier do it themselves. It's often the manufacturer who's doing that. And it's easy, no fee required. It's relatively easy to navigate in, but just keep in mind, the system is in Chinese. We can also do it for you as responsible agent in China, but just keep in mind, we will need a power of attorney. Next slide. You can see, sorry, in the declaration process, we actually need to put in a code of each of the raw material. So when you have registered the raw material, the system will automatically give you a code, and we use that code to register your product with. And just imagine in a few years how easy that will be. But I also want to say to the manufacturer and raw material suppliers, it's a huge selling point to whenever you are selling your raw material or your manufacturing skills, that you actually is able to say to the future customers, we are declared in China. I mean, you cannot enter without being declared. And we do know that other markets, especially from the US, have huge difficulties in declaring their raw materials, because they simply haven't undergone any kind of testing yet. You have an advantage because you're fairly regulated in Australia. When I say fairly regulated, I mean very regulated, but not exactly to the extent as the Chinese cosmetic market now. So you have an advantage, and also for the manufacturing raw material supplies, that you can actually put a Chinese flag on whatever you're selling and say, we are ready to help you in China. We already declared, and that means that the registration process will be so much easier for the brands. Next slide. So just to walk you through, it's 2 slides. You register your raw material by logging into the link. It's in the slide and we will share it with you. You log in and this is your first page you meet. It's just a brief description about the raw material production process and then the identification methods and other characteristics. And these are basics. For some of you, it sounds like Russian, but it's actually very basic information. Raw material suppliers and manufacturer already have these. Next slide. And then quality control and limit requirements for the hazardous substances is also something you will have already. And then evaluation conclusion from international institutions. And this part is actually something where you can use these informations from Australia, the US, Europe, wherever you got. Just keep in mind that whatever you input into the system has to be translated into Chinese. Not the full thing, but just what the name of the institution and what it is that is supporting the raw material declaration that you're uploading. Next slide. You have the option of just adding a few more things, the brief description of the usage requirements for other industries and other remarks. And I would say this type of thing is only if you, for example, sell honey and honey is used as a raw material for cosmetics. You may also use it in a fragrance light or a food or whatever it might be. Some ingredients are shared with industries and you can add those here, but it's not mandatory. So it's just the first 4 steps are mandatory. Next slide. For animal test, as Nick mentioned, 1st of May, it was possible to avoid a mandatory animal test. What was the big challenge was that every company that are registering need a GMP certificate that are signed by the authorities. And obviously, many countries weren't prepared. I will give praise to a lot of countries that has been reacting very swift, engaging a lot to get the information that is required for the different governments to act on this, and that also includes Australia, Europe, the US. For US, they are lacking behind, no doubt about it, and we don't know when they will be ready to get that certificate. We have one from New Jersey and California, but it's really it's very difficult to get. From Europe, it's much more on track, and we see the process going quite quickly now. Next slide. Just an example of how the Spanish government are assisting with the GMP certificate, basically ISO 22716 standard, and then it's signed off by the government that are kind of guaranteeing that this is correct. Basically it's like this. The Chinese government will not be able to reach out to the manufacturer, for example, in Spain, but they will be able to reach the Spanish government, and this is why this is kind of in system now. So they have someone in country that are liable for the quality and safety part that belongs to the manufacturer. Next slide. So basically, a lot of new regulations. I could frankly say use hours for each of these points. And if you have a question, I think you all know that you can reach out directly and we will help you. It is complicated in the beginning, but we see a quite smooth system coming up soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Meta. Just a reminder that these presentations will be made available. Jessie will send out an email with all the details. Now on to our last speaker, last but not least, is Mark Shaw. He's a partner at the global law firm King & Wood Mallesons. He's an Australian who lived in China for over 25 years practicing law. He now lives in Europe and works with the global brands seeking to engage in the China market. In many ways, Mark is possibly the opposite of Lisa. What I mean by this is Mark is a Westerner who lived in China. Lisa of Chinese background lived in, he grew up in the Western world. But I think both perspectives are critical in our ongoing engagement in China, and we're thankful that we've been able to hear from both sides. So with that said, it's a great pleasure to welcome Mark. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, George. So can Jesse put up the slides, please? Thanks. Actually, George, I'm also even more like Lisa. I'm ethnically German, so it even makes it more exciting. So today I'll make it quick because I know we're over time. So I think the idea, Global Victoria just asked perhaps what are some of our cosmetic clients or fast fashion clients seeing in China. So I think some of the issues are data about confidential information, a bit what Meta highlighted. About IP again because of these new regulations about registration of products, and then also a bit about supply chain disruption, which Nick also mentioned, and then just a bit about contracts because that follows on to that. Next slide, please. So I think I can skip this one, I think. Next slide. So I think IP, I think all brands must know by now that trademarks are very important. They're very cheap to register, but also the Chinese trademark should be done. So I think today I wanted to talk a little bit more about patents and trade secrets briefly. I think the first thing is we still get clients coming in, especially cosmetic brands, and they often don't really think that that China perhaps even has an IP system. It's still surprising to me that I get probably once a month a brand that comes in which has healthy sales outside of China, but hasn't even registered its English trademark in China. I would say the Chinese authorities have improved a lot. I moved to China in 1991, and really IP enforcement was, really very dire. Now they have over 300,000 law enforcement officials. There are real penalties being imposed. And I think, our law firm is actually China-centric. We have about 30 offices in China, about 5,000 people. And the fastest growing area of our business is IP litigation. And most of the clients are Chinese companies suing other Chinese companies. So I think, the days of saying that you can't do anything, it's long gone, but it can be expensive. So I think the first thing to do is what is cheap is actually developing your IP protection strategy. So register as much as you can early on. If you've registered in Australia or in Europe or America, it's definitely worthwhile registering in China. And also do a bit of due diligence about what you've already got in China, because a lot of people think it's been registered, but it hasn't. Next slide, please. So just a bit about patents, because it's a boring topic and there'll be a more detailed deck going out, but I think it's important just to think about it a bit because the supply companies are going to have to now start providing more information to Chinese regulators, etc. And so patents become more important. And so I think the thing is that what Chinese companies, even though they've become, like Lisa mentioned, much more innovative, they still lag behind, I think, in innovating chemical products and these kind of things. So I think one of the issues is in China, unlike in many parts of Europe, reverse engineering is possible. So if you've actually registered a patent in Australia or in Europe and you haven't registered in China, that actually allows the Chinese company with absolutely no legal liability to copy that product. So it's very important to do it. China has been recognizing patents for compounds, compositions, formulations since '93. So it has been established. So it's very cheap to do. So there's really no reason to do it. Next slide, please. So the one question now was about information. This was discussed with Meta because she said that she's encountered a lot of clients that hesitate, to perhaps enter the China market because they have to share information with the NMPA. And this now probably is even, a bigger concern because raw material suppliers will also need to share such information. I think it's understandable, especially because, the disclosure is quite comprehensive. It includes a lot of R&D, research documents, technical requirements, safety assessments, and somebody, that would be very valuable information. I would say in respect of the NMPA, it's relatively new with cosmetics that all this information is being supplied. But what is with pharmaceuticals, it's had a long track record, and I've never heard of anybody actually getting information from the NMPA. So I think the Chinese authorities really are not a major risk to you. I think the much greater risk is your responsible agent or your distributor. And I think it's a big risk that people have. And I think for most of the cosmetic companies we have is they do have this trusted partner in China, a distributor, and that distributor will often also be the domestic responsible agent, and they will have full access to the information, and they will also run perhaps the Tmall stores and these things, and then they have all that data as well. So I think it's really important that you find somebody who's disinterested. So I think a reliable partner is good. The full trust thing I think is difficult, but it's better to find somebody who's disinterested. So I'd rather have my own wholly foreign owned enterprise because I control it, but if not, a third party consultant, but not somebody who's really selling my product, because that gives them far too much power in the dynamic. It's also important to have a good contract to protect yourself, but even the best contract with a bad partner doesn't help so much. So it's really most crucial to pick the right partner to trust your information with. Next slide, please. So very shortly on this, because it is quite complicated, and there's a link to an article, but just basically, if you're a company that would have patents, or you do have secrets, or you have formulations, consider whether you want to make it a patent or a trade secret. If you want to make it a trade secret, which is what most people do, you do have obligations to make things confidential. So even if I think contracts are not always the silver bullet, if you don't have contracts which stress confidentiality, you won't be even able to claim that it's a trade secret. Again, just as I mentioned before, if you've got a patent outside of China, this will be unenforceable within China, and it will even mean that you're not a trade secret, it'll be public domain. China has certain things where you have, if you've made the innovation in China first, and I think Meta was talking about before that maybe tests should be done in China because you can use that outside of China as well. Any innovations need to be patented first in China or they won't be enforceable in China. And then there is in the article quite a lengthy explanation about how ingredient manufacturers can get actually quasi exclusivity for 3 years. I won't go into detail here, but that might be also of interest if there's any companies that produce the ingredients. Next slide, please. Okay, sourcing trends. I think Nick mentioned already, so I won't go into great detail. So we are seeing, I think we were expecting a year or two ago to see many more claims, but we are now starting to see claims because there's bottlenecks. Also, if China, if COVID does, lash out in China, that will lead to more problems again. Next slide, please. And so I think the big issue is, for example, you have to analyze the claim quite importantly, and I'll mention contracts very briefly a little bit later, but a lot of people think that COVID would be force majeure or these kind of things be force majeure, or if their supplier hasn't registered the ingredients, will be force majeure. I think in most cases that we've looked at, it won't be force majeure. There's more details there why it is, but force majeure requires something to be unexpected and insurmountable, so you can't get around it. So if you're a cosmetic company and you're producing now in China and you really require special raw material and your supplier will not supply you because they won't register the product, you will have a big problem. They won't be able to claim it's force majeure because they could get over it. So next slide, please. I think Lisa touched on this too about green supply chains and also, sustainability and these things. I think I'll skip this in the interest of time. I'll skip this one as well in the interest of time. So about contracts. So I think all these kind of issues we're seeing, people thinking about, well, if I have a contract with my Chinese distributor, can I enforce it? If my supplier doesn't supply, can I enforce it? If there's supply chain disruptions, I think the issue will be that look at your contract first. I think a lot of people have very poor contracts. Check if the contract is enforceable. Is it signed correctly? Is it signed with the right partner? And then, have you explained your IP and protected your data? So I think, if you can't understand the contract, you should have got someone else to draft the contract for you. And so the only other quick point on that is it's important to have either arbitration or even Chinese courts. I've come across clients that have, Melbourne courts, Victorian law. This will not help you in China unless the Chinese partner has assets in Victoria. So, perhaps before running to a lawyer, if you think you've got a problem, check your contract and just have a feel for what it looks like. Next slide, please. This one very briefly, because it is a new law which many people might have heard of. China copied to a large extent GDPR, which is the European law on data privacy, with the one exception that it doesn't really affect the government, but it really does affect cosmetic companies, consumer companies, and it really gives GDPR-like protections. So what's of particular interest with cosmetic companies is even if you're selling from overseas, like you're just a total, team or global company, you fall within the scope of this. So it's not too onerous, especially if you already comply with European regulations. It's a bit of a walk in the park to do it. If you don't do it, I don't think the Chinese authorities are going to go after you, but what they will do is they'll go after Tmall, JD, and all those kind of companies, and they will, defenestrate you. They'll take you off, very much like a few years ago when Tmall was put under pressure for having too much fake counterfeit products. They get in trouble from the regulator, and I think you would have noticed that tech companies in China are a bit under fire anyway. And this GDPR, this PIPL law is one, but there are many, many regulations, and a lot of them are aimed at these e-com platforms. So it's something to keep aware of. If you're selling into China, just make sure you're treating Chinese citizens' information appropriately. Next slide, please. So just in summary, I think like Meta said, it's a great opportunity. I think the IP protection is better than people believe, but you have to actually put the effort in to establish those rights. With data, I think, dealing with other people's data, who are based in China, you have to be more careful than you used to be, how you process it, and you have to follow those rules. But with your own data, it's very important that you trust, you find the right partner and have the right kind of contracts in place, but also security measures. So if you can hold back information, hold it back. And so I think that's important. And then with contracts, just check if the contract makes sense, if it's enforceable, if you can read it, and make sense, that's good. I've seen many contracts where, if somebody would read it 5 years later, they'd have no idea what it even meant. So just make sure the contract's sensible and make it enforceable. And then I'll pass it back to you, George.
Thank you, Mark. If anyone has any questions in regards to any of the presentations, you can now just raise your virtual hand and I'll go to you. But to start off proceedings, I'm interested, Lisa, I have a question for you. Having worked with a number of European brands in the beauty and cosmetics sector, I'm interested in your thoughts about your perceptions, your insights into Australian brands, how they compare, and your observations on how they approach the China market and how it may differ to European brands.
Thank you. That's such an interesting question. So personally, starting from myself, maybe I just have a very I just have a natural love towards Australian brands. I don't know why, but I fell in love with Sydney and Melbourne when I visited a few years ago, and that's from a personal perspective. If I talk from a very rational, like branding perspective, I think Australian brands, when I look at them, for example, Aesop or Alaya Skin that I'm currently working with, they have this great little unique indie touch to it that I haven't found anywhere else, because I have very in depth looked at some German brands, so including Barbour in the skincare sector, Dr. Barbara Sturm. In color cosmetics, it's for example Art Deco, or for example Essence and Catrice. However, I feel like in Germany it's either very scientific based skincare, so very doctor driven, very efficacy driven as well. In color cosmetics, it's rather the mass market. When I look at UK brands, it's another style, I would say, as well as the French ones. So French is more maybe luxury, niche fragrances is quite big. That's what the French are standing for. So I feel like Australia is next to maybe the US, where brands like The Ordinary or Drunk Elephant, recently also acquired, have this kind of touch and indie feel. So I think from a branding perspective, I really like that. From a consumer, acceptance perspective, France, the US are probably the biggest ones for cosmetics. However, I feel like Australian brands, they have a natural perception in the consumer's minds as well, because there are a lot of Chinese people abroad. I have family in Australia, and so the term Daigou was mentioned. So previously, a lot of Daigous were shopping vitamins, or for example, Manuka honey masks, right? So it is in the perception of the Chinese people, I feel. If you say from Australia, they go like, oh, okay, it should be something healthy or natural. So yeah, from those two points, I feel like it is different. It is different. Chinese consumers do have a you know, perception or grasp of Australian brands. So I feel like yeah, there are great opportunities.
I'm just going to draw on your point about the Daigou market, and this could be an ignorant question, but please excuse me if it is. But it appears that, particularly before COVID, that it was quite strong here in Australia. Is it stronger than parts of Europe, let's say Germany, for example?
I would say so. I would say so. Part of the reason is because my parents were first generation immigrants to Germany. So that was 30 years ago. But in Australia, the history is longer. Maybe also because of the language. So it comes from vitamins, I feel like, because I remember when I was small and we visited my family back in China, we always were bringing vitamins. So in Germany, it was from DM or Rossmann, and from Australia, it was the Swiss products. So I feel like that's kind of more in the identity. Yeah, and then the Daigous, it evolved because of all the students. So a lot of students were going to Australia more than to Europe because of the language, and then probably also because of the product identity. So the vitamin, nutrition, or cosmetic sector, and also a very big part is Chinese people love seafood. So Australia has quite a wide range of that as well. So I feel like you know, the Daigou started there. Also with the milk powder trend. And I feel like with the milk powder incident in China, that was when the German Daigou started to come into play, because German milk powder, German brands like Aptamil were perceived as super safe and good quality. And that's really when that started. Yeah, with brands like Balea coming in from the drugstores. But I feel like Australian Daigous are more established, or the network is more established. My little cousin, actually, she is a Daigou just because she went to New Zealand to study. Yeah, so she built her network. But because of COVID, everything slowed down a lot. Yeah.
I could imagine. Meta, we have a question for you. We've been asked about the typical range of costs associated with registering a product, and with that, I might just add also timeframes around that as well, if you can give some insights into costs and timeframes.
Yeah, okay. So actually, I would have shared another slide with you today. It's only because of these technical hiccups I didn't. So basically, it's like this. There's a huge divide between color cosmetics and skincare with efficacy claims, or hair care with efficacy claims, because of the testing cost. Most often, color cosmetic and fragrances can enter the market without the efficacy claim, obviously, but for skincare, you have to invest quite a lot. And we are talking about from 50,000 and up, RMB and up. So the testing costs are quite huge compared, or it takes up a huge part of it. And I would say for each product, you can maybe end up with spending even up to 100,000 just for a body lotion. So the cost associated with it is huge. That said, you have to kind of manage this by making, it's a routine that you make your test in China. And also with time, as we can document more and more from outside of China, in China, we actually perceive that the cost will go down. But then there's the cost to set up your legal entity, obviously a huge part of the cost, even though it's not directly related, but it is a requirement if you don't have a partner. And then color cosmetics, very quick. We can do it very, very quick. I wouldn't reveal how quick we can do it, but if the raw material are declared, we can definitely follow the same speed as outside of China, like in Europe and US and Australia. With skincare, for the first 2 years, we think that you should maybe allocate from 6 months to 9 months, where the biggest hurdle will actually be with you guys, not with us in China, because it's documentation, legalization, notarization of documents, all that work rests with you guys, and that's where we have seen the delays. So it won't take that long, and the time to the market is the biggest part of doing a successful registration in China, because it's moving so fast. So you have to bring the product to the market extremely fast.
Thank you, Meta. Mark, this one could be slightly curly, but in Melbourne, for example, we know of many companies that use third parties for their China engagement. Through your experience working with a number of global brands, how important is it to have someone in the company understanding China, able to, facilitate developing the contracts, the real detail? And, if we're talking about, what Meta's talking about in terms of registering a product, how much do you see of this being in-house, and how much do you see being outsourced to third parties?
Yes, I think the issue would be what kind of third parties, etc. So look, I think it would not make a lot of sense to try and do product registrations. I think that would be just too difficult. I think if I take, I think actually all the people today, it's hard to imagine that somebody in Australia would be able to do it by themselves, like with branding. So someone like Lisa, obviously you wouldn't hand over your whole brand concept to someone like Lisa, but you'd want her to have a look and understand, what's happening there. I think with lawyers, for example, I come across them much more often, that people do these contracts which aren't really enforceable. So it's important to have somebody who understands it, but also understands you. So I think sometimes the difficulty is you take a third-party supplier within China, but they don't really know what you want, and so that can be very frustrating, very time-consuming. I think there is, in other cases, I'll just, because we haven't had an exciting little story, but just a story to get people a little bit excited. You have to be a bit careful, though, about things that could cause you real damage. So having a bad branding person or the product registration just drags on, that's not critical. Bad lawyer could be very bad. But we have this one kind of client who came to us afterwards. It was a US cosmetics company, a multi-level marketing company. They built a business where they were selling $3 billion of product a year in China. None of the product was registered. The third party that they used, which is they called it a 3PL, it was actually a smuggler. So they smuggled in all this stuff. And they said, well, we didn't know. I'm sure they did know. But the end of that story was that the Taiwanese general manager was arrested a few months ago and put in jail for 15 years. And that was slightly disruptive for the business. So I think these kind of things, you can't fully outsource responsibility. So I just thought, I don't know if that answered the question, George, but.
Yeah, no, I think the point is clear. I think you've made it quite well. Listen, we've run out of time, but I would just like to say a big thank you, Lisa. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing from you and your perspective, and also to learn about your background as well. Meta, as always, it is lovely to hear from you. Mark, you got up at 5 o'clock, well, before 5 o'clock to participate in this. Is a big thank you. Meta, I know it's very early in Denmark as well. A big thank you to you all. Presentations will be sent out. If you've got any further questions or queries, please reach out to Jessie or myself, and we're happy to take discussions further. And also, I mustn't forget my colleague Nick. Thank you again for organising these speakers and the sessions. Thank you very much, and till the next session, we hope you keep well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.